So the Minnesota Timberwolves have gotten off to an amazing start to this year's postseason, going up 2-0 against the Phoenix Suns. I don't think there were a lot of matchups for Minnesota that would have been a better first round test for this team. So obviously there's matching up against the Denver Nuggets. That would have been a really, really good first round test. Then there's matching up against this Phoenix Suns team that hasn't been great at any point this season. They've had high points, they've had decent enough moments, but they haven't been great. But there was this belief that once they get into the playoffs, the trio of Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker, just by virtue of them being a really talented trio, would be able to turn it on, right? And I thought that was going to be a really, really good first round test for a defensive-minded Timberwolves team that was able to maintain their top spot in the Western Conference, or like their top 2, top 3 spot in the Western Conference for the entire year due to their defense. And so far, their defense has totally translated. So for me personally, the entire season, I was worried about the fact that they were at a lack of a really, really good offensive attack that's both with and without karl-Anthony Towns. And I didn't believe that their defense would be able to carry them. And not saying their offense has been bad so far this series, but the best part about them this series has been their defense. The reason they're winning this series has been their defense. If you have a trio of Devin Booker, Brad Beal, and Kevin Durant, and in both games, the first 2 games of the series, 2 out of those 3 guys are completely out of rhythm, or all 3 guys are completely out of rhythm, that is a really, really good defensive start. So there's game 1 where Kevin Durant has 31 points, but then Bradley Beal and Devin Booker both look horrific offensively. And then there's last night, game 2, where none of those 3 guys score over 20 points. I think Devin Booker had just 20. KD had, I think, 18. And Bradley Beal failed to score over 15 points so far this entire series. Minnesota's defense has been ridiculous, and it has totally translated here to this postseason. It's been off the chain, and it's coming all around. Like I talked about this before in a video that I had. It's their culture, right? It's not just 1 or 2 really, really good defensive guys. Like obviously, Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert, who I'm going to talk about in a second, are their 2 best defensive players. But everybody is buying in on defense. It isn't a thing where it's like, okay, let's have our primary defenders kind of save our star player. No. Your best player, Anthony Edwards, is also giving in defensively. He's also, I mean, he had a possession last night where I think he picked up Brad Beal full court and was harassing him the entire way through, and it ended up turning into a foul. But I'm like, there aren't a lot of superstar level players. There aren't a lot of first option players who are going to go pick somebody up full court like that, nearly make him turn the ball over, nearly make him get an 8-second violation. I mean, it was really Kobe-esque. If you watch the game, then you know what moment I'm talking about. It came like in the late second half, maybe late third quarter, sometime in the fourth quarter. But everyone on that team is buying in defensively. And when you have your best player willing to go out there and give that level of an effort on the defensive end, that is very, very telling. They have a very, very strong culture, and it's a juxtaposition, right, where you have this Timberwolves team that has a strong culture, that has a very strong identity against the Phoenix Suns team that doesn't have any idea. They were riding off of the fact the entire season that they have Kevin Durant, Booker, and Bradley Beal, doing so without an identity, without that one thing that they were particularly great at. Never were they a dominant offensive team. And I know they dealt with injuries throughout the course of the season, but they didn't establish themselves as a dominant offensive group at all. Like I said, for the entire year, they're kind of riding off the reputation that they have 3 all-star players or 3 superstar level players, or maybe 2 superstar level players and 1 all-star level player with Bradley Beal. So having a culture, having an identity means a lot. And right now, Minnesota's culture, the prominence of their culture, their defense first culture, is trumping what the Phoenix Suns had to bring to the table from a talent perspective. And let's go right back to the defense thing. And let's start here also with Rudy Gobert, who I think has been so good. I think his performance defensively has been the biggest storyline so far here for the Timberwolves, because coming in, we know what the discourse was about Rudy Gobert. He's overrated. We saw the player poll say that he's the most overrated big man, or the most overrated player in the NBA. He can't guard in space. He can't guard isolation. He's a one-trick pony. He's just a big guy that's just going to sit down there and block shots. It's easy to exploit him. He's going to get played off the court. So the thing about Rudy Gobert not being a switchable defender, not being a guy who can defend in space and defend in pick and rolls, that has been a myth for a very, very long time. It has been a very tired myth for a long time. Since like 2021, Rudy Gobert has gotten much better time and time again at defending in space, at defending isolations, at defending switches, right? At defending when he's being hunted as a mismatch. He's gotten so much better at that. That's been a thing, if you pay attention, that he's gotten better at over the years, right? And so I think people just kind of held on to that tired narrative that, oh, he's a 7-foot+ guy, we can take him out of the paint, and boom, that makes him ineffective. People have kind of held on to that, but it's just not accurate anymore. And I think we're getting a great display of his ability to go out there and guard in space, and guard switches, and guard isolations. We're getting a taste of that this series. He was amazing, especially last night in Game 2 when they would try to take him out of the paint at switching. He had amazing possessions at switching out and guarding guys like Bradley Beal, at switching out and guarding guys like Kevin Durant. Had some great moments being a switch defender out of pick and roll situations, on top of being amazing from a points in the paint perspective. He's doing this well against a jump shooting team that has 3 amazing perimeter scorers. There is yet to be a game this series. There is yet to be a moment this series where I'm looking at him and I'm like, defensively, Rudy Gobert can't stay on the court with these 3 guys. Now, that could change if you have Kevin Durant, if he gets on a heater come Game 3 and Game 4, or Brad Beal gets on a heater Game 3 and Game 4. Same with Devin Booker. That could end up being a situation. But so far, against a team with this much talent offensively, Rudy Gobert has been very playable, despite everyone saying you can't play him in this type of series. It's hilarious to me. And so I think that narrative about him has been really tired for a long time. Is he the perfect player? No, right? I think there are a lot of limitations that he has. I know there are a lot of limitations that he has offensively. That does piss me off sometimes to see how much he can't do on that end. I think he's really good in pick and roll situations, but not a great post-up guy, doesn't have great hands. Yes, he has his limitations from an offensive standpoint, but to me, you can never, ever question the impact that he has from a defensive standpoint. Never. So when we say things like Gobert was overpaid, your question is this, right? Would you as a GM pay a player that much just for their defense? That's what the question is, right? He got that money because of how impactful he is from a defensive perspective. So your question isn't, is Rudy Gobert worth that money? I think your question is, would you be willing to pay somebody who's that impactful of a defensive player that much money? That's what the question is. But if a team is going to value defense that much, at that time Utah valued his defense so much to give him that money, then I understand it. And so for Minnesota, if they value defense so much to bring on his contract, then it makes sense. And so far, he's proven to them that he's worth that money. If they paid him for the reasons that they wanted to pay him simply because of his defense, then they're getting a great ROI, return on investment, right? If you put, I've said this for a long time, you put Rudy Gobert on your team, you are a lock to be a top 5 defensive team in the NBA. We saw that with Utah. They had some subpar defensive guys out there on the perimeter that put him in a lot of compromising situations, and they were top 5, top 10 in the NBA from a defensive rating perspective simply because of him. If you would have taken him off the court, that is a middle of the pack or bad defensive group. Point blank, period. Same with Minnesota. Minnesota, if you took him off this team this year, no way are they number 1 defensively the entire year. They're maybe just outside of the top 10, right? You still have Jaden McDaniels, you still have Anthony Edwards, but not having that rim protection and not having a guy who's that good in drop coverage, who's that good in hedging and recovering, who's that good in blitzing and recovering and doing those sorts of things, that does take a toll on your defense, right? So I think the idea that Rudy Gobert is playing so well this series at what he's great at, and that's defense, and playing so well to his strength, I think it's great that he's denouncing or putting down this narrative that I think has been an incorrect narrative about him for a very long time. And only time is going to tell, right? Can he keep it up? It's just 2 games in. But so far, he's making a hell of a defensive statement against a jump shooting team who has so much perimeter talent. It's crazy. He's doing so well and has not been played off the court yet in this series that everyone said he'd be played off the court in. Udonis Haslam said that on his podcast, but he wasn't the only one. Everyone on Twitter was saying it. A lot of NBA players probably think it. Kevin Durant himself came out, I think after Game 1, giving credit to Rudy Gobert and talking about how impactful he is from a defensive perspective. I think we have to stop questioning Rudy Gobert's defensive impact. Yes, we can say a million things about what he doesn't do offensively, but his defensive impact is all there, period, point blank. And he has been a major reason behind the Timberwolves' success so far in this particular series. So let's see what happens in game 1, or excuse me, in game 3 and game 4 as this series swings over to Phoenix. But the point that this Wolves team has this group on the ropes like this group that is 100% stacked and built to be a championship group, they're on the ropes like this. Going down 2-0 is dangerous, because now if you lose this next one, you can pretty much write the series over with. Now you have to make history to win the series, right? So we'll see what ends up happening these next 2 games, but unbelievable defensive performance here from the Timberwolves, showing that their identity in the regular season is translating perfectly here into the postseason.